room. The reading room. The reading room. The reading room.
Welcome to the pod. This is our 9th episode and we are continuing the James Bond movie franchise. So as I've said before, we are rewatching these movies in order and we're rating and ranking each movie during these podcasts. So this is episode 9, The Man with the Golden Gun.
So in this movie, James Bond is being targeted by the world's most expensive assassin. In the background, he's also trying to recover sensitive solar cell technology, easy for me to say, that's being sold to the highest bidder. So, Jay, we rewatched this again recently. What did you remember before you rewatched it?
I think the thing that I remember the most, Andy, is Scaramanga's third nipple. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, if I'm honest, but that's the first thing that I recalled before I started to watch The Man with the Golden Gun. I also remembered Nick Nack, but I couldn't remember his name. So I remembered he had a short helper. And also would you say this is probably his most famous car stunt, or at least one of the most famous car stunts in the Bond franchise? The jump / flip.
Yes, it's got to be up there with one of the more well-remembered ones for sure.
Yeah, so remembered that as well. But also, I remembered the shipwreck, and I remember that there was a hidden base as well. I can't remember the name of the shipwreck, which, obviously rewatching the film, we remember that. So it's the Queen Elizabeth shipwreck. But yeah, I remember that there was a shipwreck and there was a hidden base. So I thought that was quite cool, actually. And I also remembered in Scaramanga's kill room, I don't know what you really want to call it, that they had a Bond mannequin. So I remembered that, and obviously, the old Roger Moore, and I remember the ending of the movie. I think that's it sticks there, sticks in the memory in terms of how he impersonates the dummy of himself. I think that's quite cool, but I did remember that. What about you?
Yeah, so like you, I remembered Scaramanga's third nipple. Nipple seems to be a regular theme in this show. I don't know what that says about us as individuals, but it's certainly something I've noticed. Speaking of nipples, I remember Chumi naked in the water later on in the film. I don't know why I remember that, but I think I do know why I remember that, because it's a pretty girl naked in the water. I remember Nick Nack as well. I remember the car jump, and I remember the kill arena, as you called it, or the room with kind of all the optical illusions and various apparatus in there, which was it's a really cool setup, actually. I quite like that. And the other thing I remember is Scaramanga's flying car, which we will discuss in a little bit more detail later, but that sort of stands out to me as a pretty cool gadget that's not one of Bond's. That's an interesting tidbit.
In terms of, because some of the films we've seen, we sometimes we don't recall really, do we, what has happened in that Bond film? But I know we were saying this before we went live. This is a film that we both said we must have watched quite a lot when we were younger. So that's probably why there were quite a lot of things that we recalled. And obviously we're going to go through our ratings later on. But yeah, I think, compared to some of the other films, this is definitely a film that we both seem to recall quite a lot of various scenes or characters in the movie.
Yeah, I think going back through the archives of what we've rewatched so far, the only one I can think of where I've remembered more would be Goldfinger, where we had a whole heap of things that we remembered from that film, and now there's this. Maybe gold is the key. We remember all the gold stuff. We'll test that theory on episode 17, I believe it'll be, when we go through to GoldenEye. But yeah, this is up there as one of the more memorable films. Not necessarily for the same reasons, but we'll get onto that later. So let's rattle through some of the information that we collect for each of the films. So the main villains, we've got two in this film. We've got Francisco Scaramanga, and we've got Nick Nack, as referred to earlier. Bond girls, we've got 4. We've got Mary Goodnight, we've got Andrea Anders, we've got Saida, and we've got Chumi. And the theme song is of the same name of the movie, The Man with the Golden Gun, by Lulu.
Yeah, so in terms of the opening credits, we've got the gold gun, very prevalent in the opening credits there. It brought back memories of, I think it was Diamonds Are Forever, Andy, with the Blofeld's cat where you have kind of the prop in the movie. So you had a lot of the golden gun in this opening credits. We've got the usual naked models. I like the Bond themes as well. We always have water ripples, a water theme, or that's how they're using to project light, or various models swimming through. So we had the water ripples, and then we had a lot of explosions as well in the opening credits. Next one that we're keeping track is body count. So this one was a bit surprising. So in this film, James Bond only has 1 kill. That's very surprising, thinking back to the other films. And we're obviously going to talk about body count a bit more in depth later on when we go through the rankings. This one was surprising as well, Andy. Gadgets, none. No gadgets. Bond doesn't have any gadgets. You could argue Scaramanga has some gadgets if you count his golden gun that he has to piece together. You could count his flying car as well as a gadget. So yeah, I was a bit surprised that there were no gadgets in this one. So I wonder if this is the only time in the franchise that he has no gadgets. Because obviously we're tracking these. This is the only film. Because even in Doctor No, he has the, what's it called?
He's got the Geiger counter.
Yeah, that's it. Even in the first movie. And this one, Roger Moore, is left wanting with no gadgets. So time it takes for Bond to say the iconic Bond, James Bond. 15 minutes, 37 seconds in this one. So he does say it, Roger Moore.
Interesting. That I think it was quite late in the previous film as well, if I recall correctly, over 20 minutes. Those stats are on the website, if in case I've misremembered those. A couple other things that we're tracking as well is his use or drinking of martini. There was none of that in this film. And similarly, there's no hat and there's no throwing of the hat. So that's something else that's missing from our collection of stats. So, thinking of the movie itself, Jay, what stood out to you as being your favourite scene?
If I'm honest, I don't think there were many memorable scenes apart from the car chase with the famous bridge roll jump is probably my favourite one. I can't remember if I said this before. You know, some car chases can go on too long. And I think we discussed this, didn't we, with the boat chase, I think, in the previous one where, I said, I think that I felt that went on a bit too long. Whereas this, I thought it was quite good. And then you had the comedy factor as well with JW, being in the car with Bond as well, which might have made it a bit more entertaining. But I enjoyed that one. That was the one when I was thinking, when I'm typing up the notes, thinking, what's my favourite scene? And then that's the one that just get kind of like flashing in my mind, really. So that's my favorite. What about you?
So that's probably the one I remember the most before going into the film. But my favorite one was the karate school scene where Bond is fighting off various karate students. I don't want to use the word ninjas because I don't think that's correct, but various students of the school, and the nieces of one of his colleagues whose name escapes me. We'll, maybe edit that in later, or we'll just ignore it. But the nieces come along and they kick all kinds of ass. 2 schoolgirls beating up various men. Just a really fun scene. Really good fight scene. Actually, some of the fight scenes have been a little bit dodgy in previous films, but I really like this as a fight scene. And there was some comedy elements as well, which we'll discuss more. So that was the one that stood out to me. How many times did you reach for your phone while you're watching this?
0, Andy, if I'm honest. No times. I think I was tempted a few times, but I was very disciplined and I was making lots of notes as well. But 0 times. How about you?
Yep, same. I was disciplined. I was going to say I was into the film, but my next point may contradict that. But I was disciplined in my approach, that I wanted to give it my full attention. So the big question here on the rating room, we need a rating. Jay, what did you give this out of 10?
5 out of 10, Andy. It was disappointing. I recall this film being a lot better than what it was, if I'm being honest. So we said earlier on, this is a film that must have been on the TV a lot when we were growing up. And I remember my dad watching it a lot as well. I can't remember. I assume he likes it because it's a film that he had on TV a lot when it was on, say like ITV or something. Not much happens. He's obviously only got the 1 kill, like we've covered. He has no gadgets. It's just, I would say it's a bit of like a dance that he does with Scaramanga. In terms of where we're going to talk about the film a bit more in depth, but the whole thing of going to the island, having dinner, and it just felt like a bit of a dance. I would say they respected each other, but Bond comes out with some stuff which there doesn't seem any kind of respect from his side. But Scaramanga does have that kind of professional respect, doesn't he, of Bond, I would say. But yeah, it was just disappointing. It was one of the films I was glad it finished, if I'm honest.
I too gave it 5 out of 10. Now, after last week where we talked about Live and Let Die, and I gave this an 8 out of 10, and it was, really, I was really pleased and pleasantly surprised with how much I enjoyed Live and Let Die. I was hoping for more of the same, to be honest, and this was just a massive letdown for me. And I liked your use of phrasing there to say that it was like a dance between Bond and Scaramanga. I think that's a very interesting way of putting it, because ultimately one wanted to kill the other and they just took so long to do it, and it felt like it was dragging on, and it almost made the plot seem very thin. Like they've got a plot that could maybe last 20 minutes, but they need to drag it out for 2 hours. So you're right. And it's interesting because there was so much we remembered before we rewatched the film. So lots of scenes, lots of characters, lots of, snippets that stand out. But outside of that, there was very little of substance, I thought. So yeah, very disappointing film this time.
Yeah, and we both said before we went live that Christopher Lee is obviously very famous, and on paper he's a very strong actor. So you would imagine before watching this film that he's going against someone really good. I'll make a comment later on as well about some of the stuff that Scaramanga's wearing in terms of when we start talking about the film. It was just, I was just really disappointed. And I know I scored, I've just had a look at the notes from the previous episode. I scored Live and Let Die quite low. And I thought that was maybe just a beginning of like more, in terms of taking over in the Bond role. And, I was expecting either a steady increase in terms of like the quality, in terms of what I'm enjoying. But this one actually went down from last week's episode. But I know, obviously, it went down significantly for you as well. So it's interesting that we both gave it 5 out of 10, because I know broadly in line, aren't we, in terms of scoring? Usually, we're one or two different, but in terms of the rankings, we're broadly similar until last week's episode. But yeah, it was disappointing because I was looking forward to watching it. I was telling the wife, looking forward to watching this one. But yeah, it was just underwhelming.
Underwhelming is the word. So the two of us thought disappointing, underwhelming. What about your wife? Did she agree, or did she have another viewpoint?
Yeah, so she's struggling a bit now, if I'm honest, in terms of watching the film. So she said it was all right. The movies now are getting repetitive, and she said it just feels like we're watching the same film each time, which, I disagreed with a bit. And she just said, especially Mary Goodnight, she said the women are just really weak. And Bond continues to be like a chauvinistic pig. But I know we're going to talk about it later, but Bond, I felt more in this film was very different to more in Live and Let Die. I did, in terms of how he treated women.
I tend to agree with that. Yeah.
She keeps just saying she can't wait to get to the Brosnan films. So she's keeping in there, slugging it out. But yeah, she didn't fall asleep. I did check because I know there was a few episodes ago where she was like dropping off. I can't remember which film that was now. But yeah, she wasn't overly impressed. And there was just lack of action, wasn't there, as well? In terms of like, I know it's apart from kill count, there was obviously Scaramanga had more kills than Bond, didn't he? In this film.
Yeah.
So you still had little bits of action, but it just felt drawn out.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Quite flat. Yeah, lack of action is interesting. So again, my wife is not partaking in watching of the Bonds, and in this particular week, I don't blame her. I'll give you a bit of inside baseball for the listeners out there. I spoke to my dad this morning, and he, takes an interest in the podcast. He's no idea what a podcast is, but he feigns an interest, and he says, "So how far are you with the Bond series?" And I said, "Oh, we've just watched Man with the Golden Gun," and he just went, "Oh, that's the worst one, that is." Straight out. So that probably tells you all you need to know in terms of where we're going to talk about this and where we've ranked it. But that was an interesting comment from my dad in absence of my wife.
Sorry, Andy. I wonder it is going to be the worst one, though. It might be his worst one, but I wonder when we get finish all 25 films, will it be, the worst one?
I'm not sure it will be. I hope it is, because this was, if we're in fives out of 10, we're in for a long road ahead if it goes any lower. So I'm hoping this is the trough, and we're going to hit new heights very soon. But to be determined, I guess. Should we get into it in a little bit more detail? So, a few other facts before we get into the meat and potatoes of it. This was a runtime of 2 hours 5 minutes. So, again, in the same ballpark as all the others we've had so far. I think this will be probably slightly higher up the scale in terms of the ranking. This was released in 1974, so just a 1 year gap from the previous release. And this was the fourth and final film directed by Guy Hamilton. Jay, over to you. Have you got some more stats and talking points you want to go through?
Yeah, I'm gonna kick off with box office, Andy. I like to talk about money sometimes. So, box office stats. So, Andy, again, budget $7 million. So that's the same as Live and Let Die. So, I know I've been banging on it for the last few episodes. It just seems to be either getting lower or it's just maintaining. We've had some higher budget films earlier on, but this one is 7 minutes, the same as Live and Let Die. But interestingly, Andy, it took, I was going to say it only took, but, it still took a significant amount of money. But it took $97.6 million in box office returns worldwide. So that's a massive reduction of just over $64 million.
That is a big drop
compared to Live and Let Die. That is staggering. That is, when you think about it. So that's Live and Let Die, as we mentioned before, it's like approaching $162 million. And this one, I'm only saying only because it was a $7 million budget. Only took 97, so that is a big job. So in terms of the 9 films we've seen so far, this is the 4th lowest return. So I think that's quite significant, that is, really. And in terms of box office returns, this film as well also opened to mixed reviews. So it wasn't widespread. Usually, they open really strong. And we've said in previous episodes where some cinemas across the world have been open like 24 hours, just, rerunning the film. But this one definitely opened to mixed reviews. Yeah, so I don't know. It's people are getting a bit tired with the franchise, 9 movies in. Or, I mentioned before that around that time as well, other studios were kind of, I don't know what you want to say, getting on the piggybacking onto Bond's success, but there were other movies being developed coming out as well in terms of spy movies. I don't know, but yeah, mixed reviews are, I would say ours wasn't mixed. Ours were quite negative. So yeah, even though, I don't think you could really class us as an official review, but it was definitely mixed. And also, Andy, in terms of this was the last Bond film that Harry Saltzman produced as well. So he had some financial difficulties and he sold his 50% stake to United Artists as well. So that actually caused some legal issues around the Bond ownership as well. So the next film was delayed for 3 years. So that kind of slowed things down there. And I suppose if you're someone like Roger Moore, that's not the best thing to happen, is it? Because we've already committed his aging already, 1 movie in, and now we're in 2 movies in, and now there's going to be a delay of 3 years as well. I suppose, that opened up opportunities to do other films, but in terms of that momentum, in terms of the franchise, where they're churning them out every few years, that definitely slowed things down. And
Yeah, it's leaving money on the table potentially.
yeah, I like that. And Andy, this is something I didn't know until we were researching this, that Alice Cooper wrote and submitted a title song for this film. So you can find his version on YouTube, and I did listen to it. Not my type of music, if I'm honest, and I think it was actually worse than the version that they took, that you mentioned earlier, Lulu sang. So it was rejected, and at the last minute they had to write something, and Lulu performed that. So I don't know. Did you happen to listen to it? I sent you the link. Did you give it a go?
I've not, but I should and I will. It sounds intriguing because I wouldn't associate Alice Cooper with Bond song. So I'm intrigued, but you've already given it a negative review, so maybe that's swayed my decision. But I will seek it out and give it a listen.
Yeah, the version I sent you actually is the one that they use with the intro. So you've got the intro as part of the Bond film, and then you've got Alice Cooper's song playing over it as well. But he actually, even though it got rejected, I don't have any of his albums, but he actually released that version of the song on a later album that he released.
Okay.
So it is out there, people to listen to.
Alice Cooper fans out there may already be fully aware of it and familiar with it. So if you are, do let us know. Let's continue with some information about the film. So Q is back. He was left out of Live and Let Die, but he's back in this movie. Although, interestingly, as we pointed out earlier, Bond doesn't have any gadgets, so it makes you wonder why they bothered in bringing him back at all. But there you go. Also mentioned the role of Scaramanga, played by Christopher Lee. Originally, the role was offered to Jack Palance, but he turned it down. And another interesting point around Christopher Lee was Ian Fleming's step-cousin. And Fleming had suggested Lee for the part of Dr. No, but the producers had already cast Joseph Wiseman at that point. So another example of it's not what you know, it's who you know, potentially. Although Christopher Lee is a fine actor in his own right, so I don't want to disparage him too much. We have the first appearance of Maud Adams, who plays Andrea Anders. She will go on to appear in a couple more Bond films. She features in Octopussy, and she has a cameo in A View to a Kill, so listen out for our review of her performances in those films in the coming weeks. And one more point from me, there's a scene in the film at the Bottoms Up Club, and this is actually a real bar, or was a real bar in Hong Kong. It closed in 2004, but then reopened for a bit and then closed down permanently in 2009. So a real bar in Hong Kong, not just a made-up one for the Bond multiverse.
Yeah, and Andy, going back, correct me if I'm wrong with this, but is this the first and only time where we've had an actress playing different Bond girls? And they're not like, she's, I know it's a cameo in A View to a Kill, but she's an actual Bond girl in Octopussy. Is this the first and only? And she's playing a different character. Is this the first and only time? I when I was researching that and I found that, I thought, I can't recall anyone else. We've obviously had Sylvia Trench, but the actress is playing the same character, whereas Maud Adams is playing three different Bond girls. So yeah, I thought that was interesting.
You might be onto something there. Yeah, I know we've talked about the recycling of actors quite a bit, but it seems to be on the male side, and I don't recall repeat appearances by Bond girl actresses other than the aforementioned Sylvia Trench. So that is a good point, and maybe want to look out for in future episodes to see if that remains the case, or whether this is a theme on the female side now as well as the male side.
Yeah, and if anyone's listening and they know the answer, feel free to contact us on any of the social media accounts. But I thought it was weird. I know I'm going to talk about this point again, but the amount of people out there, especially female actors that can play Bond girls, it seems a bit weird to recycle an actress for like a main Bond girl for a different character. It just feels a bit weird. I don't know why. Maybe when we get to Octopussy and we do our research, maybe it becomes clear maybe someone dropped out and they had to recast or something. But yeah, it just seems a bit weird.
Yeah, I agree.
Carrying on with my point. So this film is often criticized. So Bond, as my wife comments, is quite chauvinistic, sexist, but this film is often criticized for being sexist, especially with Goodnight, where she's portrayed as a stereotypical blonde buffoon, and she's pretty much useless to Bond. And I would have to agree, Andy, with that comment. She is, I don't want to say irrelevant, but she doesn't really add much considering she's supposed to be helping Bond in this mission. She seems more of a hindrance, really.
Yeah, I would agree. She's eye candy. That's really her only purpose in this film.
Andy, you're not my Bond girl. You're my JW.
Carry on with the next point, boy.
There you go, Andy, pulling out a different accent. Yeah, your acting talents are shining through again. Yeah, so again, this is one of the things about this podcast I like is doing all the research. So again, I thought this was interesting. So the corkscrew car jump was actually demonstrated in America before this. So this was demonstrated in America in 1972. And the producers saw the stunt and they actually contacted a stuntman and bought the copyrights for that stunt to prevent anyone else including it in a film. I thought that was interesting. And they saw that 2 years earlier and they're already thinking future films, we can include it in The Man with the Golden Gun. So I thought that was some good foresight there for the producers.
Yeah, especially since there was a Bond film in between as well. Live and Let Die was out in 1973. So if they saw this and just kept it in their back pocket and waited for the right film, that's very good foresight. One final point to call out here. So Mary Goodnight and Andrea Anders are both played by Swedish actors. And these are the first, but not the last to come from Sweden. Shout out to any of our Swedish listeners out there. You're getting a mention on episode 9.
Yes, I've been to Sweden before, Andy. I haven't been to many places. I just wanted to mention that because, when you mentioned about going to America and you seeing Angelina Jolie, was it?
Angelina, yes, indeed. Yeah, me and Ange, we're like two peas in a pod.
You're the
Angelina.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
what would your one be? Angelina.
Yeah, it doesn't work, does it?
Anyway, when I was in Sweden, I didn't see any Bond girls. Just wanted to point that out. But lovely country.
Angelandi. Angelina. Feel free to submit suggestions to our usual social accounts on the upcoming nuptials between myself and Angelina Jolie. What should our married name be? I'm going to move on before I get us into any sort of legal trouble with Angelina and her lawyers. Let's talk about some goofs and continuity errors that we saw throughout the film. So there is a fight scene in the dressing room of the belly dancer with some gangsters, and the crew are visible in the mirror. That's a bit of a slip up there by the cast and crew. And another point around the Queen Elizabeth liner. So it's featured as a secret base. It's in the Hong Kong harbour, but it's actually sank in 1972, not 71, as the tour guide in the film stated. So someone needs to study up on their liner sinkings before they make more Bond films.
Yeah, I suppose in those days they couldn't Google it. They had to rely on books and newspapers. Fact finding must have been a bit hard in those days, or a bit slower.
Excuses. That's what I'm hearing.
Last continuity error, or goofs, is when Bond travels to Scaramanga's Island, you see the plane flying and it initially has 2 floats under each wing. As I'm acting out, I know no one can see me, but I'm doing the wings there. So, but when he actually comes to land, the plane's actually got 1 float under the wing. So what happened to the other float? Because you didn't see anything, it didn't get shot down. He obviously was detected by radars, but Bond doesn't know that it was detected. So it wasn't any kind of mishap in terms of getting to Scaramanga's Island. So yeah, what happened to that? I noticed that and I thought that was a bit weird. but generally, I don't. So when sometimes continuity errors happen, and as an audience, you think that's weird, but making a film, how did they miss that? There's literally something missing from the plane. How do you miss that? If you're filming it, or even just that you're the person that's looking after the aeroplane. How does that continue? It's just
that
a
is
bit
a
weird.
good question, because in films you have people whose sole job is to look for continuity and they missed it. But yeah, it's not like it's a small item. This is a plane. Like, you're going to notice if it's changed, surely. Who knows?
Yeah, because it's not like it's one of those things where, say, you have gunfight or some damage because of gunfight. So things might, when the shooting scene's not necessarily in sequence, and when they're putting things together, they might, chop and change. But this is literally the plane has two floats, nothing happens, and then it's only got one float. So yeah. So there's obviously, I'm assuming, more continuity errors. We've just picked those three. So yeah, let's start digging into the film a bit more now. So we've got the opening scene. So as mentioned in the previous movie, this is the only gun barrel scene. So this is the only sequence that has been used for these two films, Live and Let Die and The Man with the Golden Gun. They actually obviously did a new sequence for the next film. So this film, they've just used it for the two. And Andy mentioned in the last episode where Moore's, holding his shooting hand with his other hand, so this is the first time that the Bond actor's kind of using two hands with a gun. But Andy as well, I did fact check this as well, and I watched all the gun barrel sequences on YouTube for this bit. So this is the last gun barrel sequence until Daniel Craig films where Bond is wearing a business suit. So he transitions to a tux.
Interesting.
So more, I thought it was interesting. We obviously mentioned in the last episode, didn't we, about how savvy, smart Moore looks. But yeah, this is it. He gives that, he puts it back in the wardrobe.
It's one of those things I've not really paid much attention to so far, but the tux, for me, is the more memorable scene in terms of this gun barrel sequence, and I associate the tux more than the business suit. So I was under the impression, before going into this rewatching, I was under the impression that Daniel Craig was the first to not wear the tux because of how he changed the nature of the film. So that's a nice little Easter egg there. I like that.
Yeah. So we learn something new every day on this podcast, don't we, Andy?
Indeed. You can find this under the educational section on wherever you find your favourite podcasts. The first scene is on Scaramanga's island. Straight away, we see Scaramanga has 3 nipples. That's obviously going to be an important point later on. So we're brought to the audience's attention straight away that he is a man with an extra nipple. Not as good a catchier title as The Man with the Golden Gun, but there we go. We also see Knick Knack as well in the opening scenes of the film. So straight away, Knick Knack is on the scene. And we have a gangster from Las Vegas called Rodney who arrives at Scaramanga's island to kill him. Now, the actor who played Rodney was also featured in Diamonds Are Forever. He was one of the goons who threw plenty of tool out of the window of Bond's hotel room. It's not stated within the film whether it's the same character or not. So that is unknown to us, at least. If anyone knows, please let us know. So then we will know. And there's a lot of no's in that sentence. But it's a very interesting point that he arrives. It's clearly him, but there's no mention that he is the same person or not.
I recognised him, Andy, from Diamonds Are Forever. So I did recall that, and I did do quite a bit of research, but it's just unconfirmed. Lots of people have stated that Rodney, but whenever, I hear Rodney, I just think of Only Fools and Horses, but it is a different Rodney. It's not Dale Boy's brother. It is Rodney. So yeah, I did recognise that. Scaramanga has I was going to say a beautiful collection, but I don't know whether I won't class it as beautiful. I'm sure lots of people will. He has a butterfly, moth or insect collection. So we obviously seen in an earlier movie, I can't remember which one it was, where Q has a a butterfly collection. And obviously I mentioned Andy, my nan also has a butterfly collection. So maybe the three of them can get together and talk about butterflies. I thought that was interesting. But also another thing, and I was going to write something else, but I'm not going to stereotype certain people from certain places in England. But Scaramanga is rocking a tracksuit in this film, which I thought was interesting that he's wearing a tracksuit. And my note was, is this the first time we see a Bond villain in a tracksuit? It's not very intimidating, is it? You know, I know he's not come across his nemesis yet, Bond, but if you come across Scaramangas and he's just rocking in some kind of tracksuit, it's not going to fill me with dread or anything. It's not like, you know, imagine Oddjob was in a trackie, you know, with his hat and everything. It doesn't do it for me. It takes it away.
I agree. It's a very strange look for a Bond villain. And yeah, it does remind me of a certain group of people from the northwest of England on the banks of the Mersey, is what I think you were alluding to. Apologies to our listeners from Liverpool. Jay is obviously anti-northwest, being a southerner, but I'll call him out on these things on the podcast. I'm doing you social justice as we go along. You'll edit all this bit out, I know you will, because I've just dropped you in it, but I'm in one of those moods today, so
we'll see. Yeah, so I think you mentioned it, Andy, earlier. So we see Scaramanga's kill room / arena. I'm going to go with arena, Andy, because it's bigger than, well, technically you could class it as a warehouse or some kind of room, but I'm going to call it an arena. And I did quite like this because you've got lots of illusions to disorient its victims, I would say, and distract them. So we see a Western setting when he first comes in, then there's a mobster setting. But one thing I noted, but I've done some research about this, I noticed as well that the dummies, I could tell that they're played by real actors. You know, sometimes where someone stood still, but you can see them slowly rocking. But yeah, I did a bit of research on this, and it was the actors. They weren't dummies.
That is a very interesting observation. I would have assumed that actors would be more expensive than mannequins. And when you're limited to a $7 million budget, surely you want to make every penny count. So that's very interesting. But I agree. I thought, well, these mannequins are very lifelike, and if they are real people, that would explain it. So we're still in the arena. We've got the golden gun in a crow's beak in a room full of mirrors, and that's what Scaramanga is seemingly looking for. We see him slide down the ramp. He kills Rodney with a headshot, and then we see the James Bond dummy, and he shoots the fingers off the Bond dummy, which I thought was quite a cool visual, and also shows that he is, you know, an expert with his trigger finger. So that was a nice little scene. And one thing I noted as well throughout this is that Nick Nack seems to be the brains behind it, and it seems like he's setting Scaramanga up to fail. Like he's, you know, it seems a bit of a double cross almost, and I didn't really remember that dynamic, but then it just seems like actually what he was doing is having a bit of fun and making it challenging for him, and I quite like that that play between them, how, you know, Scaramanga is the boss, it seems, but Nick Nack seems to have not so much of a hold over him, but he seems to have that freedom to push his buttons a little bit, and I thought that was quite interesting, and I don't think we've seen anything quite like that in the previous Bonds so far with the other villains. So that was a nice little dynamic between the two.
Yeah, and that's interesting, Andy, because when you were just talking through that, I was just trying to think, have we seen anything similar where there's a bit of banter between the main henchman and the main villain? And I don't really recall anything. So yeah, it was definitely interesting, like you said, about the dynamics and the bit of banter between them, because like you said, the film sets it up that like Nick Nack setting him up, but obviously it's not. It's just all a ploy that I wonder how many times they've done that before. So yeah, it was interesting, definitely.
Do you think I'm the Nick Nack to your Scaramanga in the podcasting world?
You won't find me in a tracksuit. Starters.
Or I could be the Oddjob to your Goldfinger.
Yes, yeah, good, yes. I've probably got more of the physique of Goldfinger than Scaramanga, to be honest. And I've charged a lot less than
the physique of Oddjob. That's for sure.
But yeah, I think we're probably more the Thumper and Bambi of the the villains world. Less dynamic and less flexible now. Yes, so we're on to the opening title sequence of music. So obviously Andy mentioned at the top of the pod, the theme song was sung by Lulu and composed by John Barry. So John Barry does return. So he obviously missed Live and Let Die. We mentioned that in the last episode. So if you don't recall you missed that, go and give that one a listen again. And this is the only Bond type film title song not to chart as a single in either of the UK or the US charts. So again, it didn't do well. And obviously, stay tuned to later on where we're going to rank the theme song with the other one. So, and this is an interesting point, Andy, as well. John Barry, he did an interview and he considered this to be among the weakest of his songs in the series. And he stated in an interview, "It's the one I hate most. It just never happened for me." And I wonder whether, that was because of the lateness of it, with were they toying around with the idea of the Alice Cooper version or not, or is something else happened? It didn't float my boat, and we're going to, rank it later on, aren't we? But yeah, I thought that was interesting in terms of the bits I picked out in terms of the music or the title sequence.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, and not a very good sales pitch by John Barry if he's wanting to get this sold in shops and get it charted, if he's openly calling that out. But another tidbit on the song is that it's the first time in the Bond franchise where the song at the end of the film is not just a reprise of the opening song. There's a different lyrics set. There are different lyrics in the end song, and this signaled a change for future Bond films where we have different variations and then sometimes a completely different song altogether. So that's another little Easter egg on the opening song and credits front. Following that, we're at MI6 headquarters. Bond is talking to M and group, and someone asks the question, "What do you know about Scaramanga?" Bond says he knows about the third nipple, and he reels off some other facts. I thought this was quite interesting that they know this information about Scaramanga, yet it's said seconds before that nobody knows what he looks like. And I just felt like those 2 points were at odds with each other. So how do they know about the third nipple if they don't know anything about what he looks like? That just seems to be a bit of an oxymoron there. In this scene, we see that Bond has a golden bullet sent to him via M, which has 007 etched on it. So they believe that Bond has been identified as Scaramanga's next target. And another point around this is, so we said earlier that he's the world's most expensive assassin. $1 million per assassination is the fee, and that this is back in 1974. In today's money, that's over $6.3 million. So that is an expensive kill.
That is very expensive, and you could get me and you for a lot cheaper, couldn't you? We would even do it for 1974 money, wouldn't we? 1 million
potentially, yeah, absolutely. We'll be in the film, the men with the lead pipes, rather than the golden gun,
or in my case, unleaded. I like this because N makes a little quip about this. So he mentioned about jealous husbands probably want Bond as a target. That made me chuckle when I was listening to this, because M, last few episodes, last few films, and we mentioned this in episodes, he's just showing a bit of sass, isn't he, to Bond a lot of the time as well. And I made a note here, Andy, and I know we said it in the first episode, so it's not going to go, he's not changing. But Moore is already looking old in this movie, I think.
I agree. He does look quite old already.
Yeah, and like I said about the sass from M, M seems to enjoy that. Scaramanga might have the edge over Bond as well, because like you said, no one knows what Scaramanga looks like. Everyone blimey knows what Bond looks like. His reputation precedes him. Even diamond thieves in, I think it was Amsterdam, know him, but not what he looks like, but just know about him. So yeah, he did seem to enjoy that bit.
That's an interesting point. And you're right about M being a bit sassy. I think he's, it almost seems at times like he's annoyed by Bond, even though Bond is arguably his best agent. He's not his only agent, of course. They did have an agent 002, Bill Fairbanks, and that was a previous victim of Scaramanga. And this is going to lead Bond to go to Beirut. And I think you mentioned this point. It's the only time this version of 002 is mentioned. I don't know if there are other points in other films where 002 is referred to, but we've got a number to a name now. Bill Fairbanks is 002.
Sorry, Andy. I believe there is. And also, oh, Andy, what was the film where you see, that big grand room and they had the map on the wall and they had all the agents around? That's like, if you base it on the positioning, there's a 002 there as well, which I believe isn't Bill Fairbanks.
I want to say that was Thunderball. I'm happy to be. I could be mistaken.
I think it is, yeah, because of it was because of the plane being stolen, and it was like an emergency, in terms of international emergency.
There we go. One final point from the MI6. We've got Bond and we've got Moneypenny, and their usual flirting with each other. Both call each other darling. Standard fare for the pair of them, I think, by this point. Then we are moving on to Beirut. So Bond is seen enjoying some belly dancing, and there are obviously people watching him, some gangsters of some sort, not looking particularly happy, but they're observing him having a good time at the belly dancing club.
Do you know why they're unhappy? Because they just look really miffed off, don't they? And there's no interaction between Bond and them. Are we just assuming that they're somehow, I don't know, they can't be affiliated with Scaramanga, can they? Did you think it was a bit weird because of the way they were acting, or is it just because he seemed to be getting attention from the belly dancer and they were a bit jealous? I don't know. I don't know what your thoughts were.
I'd not thought about it, to be honest, and they don't seem to be associated with anyone. They just seem to be random gangsters that are after a fight with Bond, and they're not happy with him for some reason. And I don't think it's ever really explained.
The way that I was thinking about it was, have you seen the film Armageddon?
I have, yep.
And they go to the strip joint, and then they got that biker gang jealous because all the women are interested in the space crew because they dishing out money. And in my head, that's what I anticipated before this scene. Bond was there, just throwing all the cash around, getting all the attention of the belly dancers. But they must have cut that scene.
He's making it rain.
Yeah,
as the kids would say.
But I wonder, I don't know why they weren't happy, but they took an immediate disliking on camera in terms of what we see to Bond. And another thing picked out, Andy, there is it's noticeable that Bond, this version of Bond, so the Moore version, favours cigars. It's obviously evident in the Connery films. He has the cigarettes. Also, it's interesting that Moore, so this was a decision by Roger Moore, so he wanted to kind of distinguish his version of Bond to, except for Connery's, because obviously we mentioned in the first episode, he's very slick gentleman. Like I think my wife said, didn't she, about his English gentleman. And I would say cigars seem a bit more sophisticated compared to cigarettes. Apologies out there for any smokers of cigarettes. Could be worse. You could be smoking roll-ups. But yeah, so Moore wanted to distinguish that version. So he asked if he could do cigars. But also, interestingly, he managed to actually get that signed into his contract. Imagine that, Andy. You're getting paid a nice sum of money. You get to... act on screen with some beautiful Bond girls, and you get a steady supply of free cigars on set as well as part of your contract. And so I think you can't go much wrong there, can you?
One of the perks of being Bond, I suppose.
Yeah, and the last point about cigars was, I don't know how practical this is, and I don't know if there's any smokers out there, but in the novels, Fleming's Bond used to smoke between 60 and 70 cigarettes a day. You couldn't do that now, can you? The price of how much cigarettes cost. Blimey.
That is, I mean, that just doesn't fit with the Bond you see on screen. Someone who's fit and tough and chases down bad guys. Because in the image I have in my head of someone who smokes 60 a day is just someone wheezing and coughing and spluttering and also just the time it takes to smoke a cigarette. If you're doing that 60 times a day, how do you get any work done?
And that image that you have is basically me, but I'm a non-smoker. So I'm just like wheezing and coughing and everything. But it's interesting, Andy, where you mentioned about that, because that is the reason why Daniel Craig doesn't smoke, because of that, in terms of trying to be realistic in terms of chasing people down, running around, being active. And he's like, how can you do that on 60, 70 cigarettes a day?
Yeah.
Doesn't quite fit, does he?
Half the film will just be Bond going to the offie asking for 20 Marlboro Lights or whatever. Other cigarette brands are available, of course. They're just the first that came to mind. Yeah, interesting point. Let's move on. So whilst we're in Beirut and we're in the belly dancing club, to give it its official title, Bond goes back to the dressing room. He's kissing the belly dancer's stomach. This is Saeed, I believe, and he's attacked by aforementioned goons. He dispatches of them throughout the course of the fight scene. But some interesting points that happen. One is that he swallows the bullet that's in the belly dancer's stomach, and this is the bullet that supposedly killed 002. That's what he's there to see. And also there's a point where one of the goons smashes a champagne bottle over Bond's head, and he completely no-sells it. It just doesn't affect him whatsoever. It's like he forgot it happened. It was just very off for me, that particular point. And also the dubbing for the belly dancer herself is a little bit off in this scene as well. So just a few pointers about what happens during this fight scene.
Yeah, thank you for that, Andy. Now we know that Bond swallows. So now we move on to Mackay. Bond is looking stylish again. He goes to meet the gun maker. Bond arrives, and we both made this note. So this is, we both picked up on this. Well done, Andy. Pat on the back for me as well there. But yeah, he interrupts this Asian woman and two children and inquires where the below kids, Lazar, and he holds up the piece of paper and then he starts talking slowly. So this is obviously someone who is not really with the language there. But then it just came to me when I was watching this film, and we pointed this out in the, You Only Live Twice. Bond explicitly says to Moneypenny that he went to Cambridge to study Oriental languages, air quotes there. So what's happened there? Is this Mackay not an Oriental language? Is this like, we both made this note, continuity error? I would say between movies, it's a bit harder to recall.
So we mentioned earlier there's no gadgets from Q, but Lazar has some pretty specialist guns in his gun shop, factory, workshop, I guess it is, including one that he demonstrates to Bond and lets Bond have a go with, which is some sort of rifle, which is good for a man who's lost two fingers. So it's sensitive to a man with three fingers on his hand, so it's obviously for a very specific client in mind. But you can see it's kind of making all kinds of cool weapons. Again, in this scene, Bond introduces himself as Bond James Bond, just in case we didn't get it earlier. And Lazar acts like a bit of a fanboy. He's obviously heard of Bond and he wants to make something for him. So Bond's reputation kind of reaches far and wide, even to far-flung places like Macau.
So we're on a boat ride to Hong Kong, and we're also going to cover Hong Kong bits now. So we see the shipwreck of RMS Queen Elizabeth for the first time. Bit of facts here for you, Andy. So in real life, Tong Chao Yong bought the RMS Queen Elizabeth at an auction for $3.2 million. So Tong originally intended to convert the ship into a floating university, which I think is very nice indeed. But there was a fire. And the firefighters were, trying to put it out for 24 hours. But because of the fire damage and all the water damage, the ship was completely destroyed and it capsized and sank. So, yeah, there was an investigation into this, but it was inconclusive, Andy. So arson was widely suspected, but no suspects were ever identified. I did do a bit of reading, a bit more research, and some people did say that Tong apparently insured the ship for something like $7 million. It was double what the ship cost. So was it an insurance job, or was it to do with some kind of he had disagreements with some establishments apparently as well over there. So yeah, so the ship was destroyed. Obviously very disappointing if you go and buy a big ship and it ends up getting set on fire. And then you lose all that money. So that's a bit disappointing. But I liked how they utilize the ship, Andy, in this film. I think it is. I don't know if you would call it a prop or like a filming location. I think it was like really good how they utilize that.
It's a pretty cool set. I thought the way they used the angles of the walls and the stairs and such. Yeah, I agree. Very, very nice.
We are introduced to Goodnight now, Mary Goodnight. And she just blocks Bond's taxi. So Blonde is, wanting to shoot straight off. And he's following Andrea, isn't he, at that point? So he gets blocked off by Goodnight. But I picked up that there was a bit of, I've made a note to say obvious history. And, if you didn't pick it up, then I don't think it is obvious. But yeah, I picked up that he wasn't overly impressed to see her. So there did seem to be a bit of history. And I did a bit of research in this. And in Ian Fleming's novels, Goodnight actually appears in 3 books. So On Her Majesty's Secret Service, You Only Live Twice, and The Man with a Golden Gun. I don't know if that is to recognize that they've had some kind of history or not. Did you pick up on that in terms of?
There was definitely previous between them. It's hard to say what exactly that history was, and Bond was obviously very annoyed when she arrived on the scene because of her messing up, basically. But yeah, I got the sense that they were acquainted somehow in the past. Moving on, we're still in Hong Kong at this point, and later on we see Bond at the hotel or apartment of Andrea. She's having a shower. He just walks in, has a nice little watch of her, because that's the kind of thing that Bond does. We were on nipple watch because, we are childish 30 and 40-something men. But it seems like, to me, I thought she was wearing a strapless bra even in the shower. So, they did somewhat of a good job to keep her dignity intact. However, to me, it was very obvious that she was wearing a bra in the shower, which is a bit of a continuity error, you could argue. Unless there are any females out there that do wear their bra in the shower, in which case I apologise profusely for your shower choices. And as she has Bond at gunpoint, and then she makes a call to reception and turns away from him to talk. And that doesn't make sense because clearly she's intimidated, frightened by him, by the fact she's got him at gunpoint, and then just turns away. So it doesn't know what he's up to at that point. That seems to be a rookie error on her part. And another thing in the interaction between the two, Bond gives her a bit of a slap and he's quite rough with her. And we commented in the previous episode that Bond was, Roger Moore's version of Bond seemed to be a little bit more gentle, a bit tender, but this time around is a little bit more aggressive. And I wonder if this is the first time that Roger Moore actually slaps a woman as Bond, because I don't recall that from the previous film.
Yeah, I believe it is, Andy. And apparently Roger Moore was a bit uneasy about this. He didn't think it was necessary, but I think it was a director, that wanted Bond to be more aggressive, akin to kind of like Connery's version in this particular film. But yeah, apparently Moore did say he was a bit uneasy in terms of the arm twist that he has to do, and then the slap as well. So yeah, definitely an observation, and the wife commented on this as well, actually. So this was a nice little transition. So Bond then makes a quip about bottoms up when they're having a drink, and then it cuts straight to the bottoms up club with a lovely lady dancer / server with her bottoms up. So I thought that was quite nice there. We also see Gibson. So he's the missing energy specialist, and I think this was quite good, actually, Andy, where the scene is outside. You're assuming Scaramanga's obviously getting ready in the building, ready to kind of, I don't know if you say sniper or not, and you're assuming that it's going to be Bond who's the target, obviously, because he's received the golden bullet. You see Nick Nack as well hovering around, with the shot with the television screens as well. So you're assuming, aren't you, that Bond's going to get shot or some kind of attempt. But then Scaramanga's shot instead. So that was, I think if you're watching it first time, I think it's probably a bit surprising. He doesn't tend to miss, does he, Scaramanga, as well. So he gets shot up, Gibson gets shot outside. And then, the police arrive and Bond is picked up by the police lieutenant. And this is when you actually find out that the Queen Elizabeth shipwreck has been turned into a secret base. So that's good. And you commented on this earlier as well, that enabled them as well. Obviously, the ship is on its side, so some of the angles and shots were quite trippy as well. But it's like you commented earlier, it's quite good how they did that. And then, last point before I pass over to you, Andy, is we get Q&M on location. So the last few films have been out, haven't they? Well, not Q, because obviously it was benched, wasn't he, in the last one? But M has been getting out there, hasn't he? Because obviously earlier on they were always back at base. But yeah, it's nice to get out there.
Bond on tour. It's a bit of a road trip for M and his crew. So when he's speaking to him, they're talking about the solar energy crisis, which is quite interesting and quite topical because there was a genuine energy crisis in the UK at the time. So it felt like they were just naturally following what was going on in the news at the time. So it's quite topical. M tells Bond that he's got to take Goodnight with him on a mission. Bond does not seem happy about this, and I think this goes to the earlier point we raised around a bit of previous history between Goodnight and Bond is not impressed at all. So he's clearly taken some sort of disliking to her. And final point from me from this particular area of the world is that there's a scene with Scaramanga and Andrea, and they're in bed together, and she's quite scared, and he's got the golden gun, and he's sort of stroking her gently with it. It's quite sadistic. I thought it was a bit weird, to be honest. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
A bit, yeah, it was a bit weird. I'm trying to think of the word there, but I can't think of a better one than weird. Andrea is obviously uneasy, and I wonder, is she uneasy just because of that, or is she uneasy because she's obviously just met with Bond, and does Scaramanga know something? So is she thinking, oh no, I'm going to be next? So yeah, it was a bit weird. So we're on to Bangkok now, and Bond and the lieutenant are scoping out the High Fat's place. I'm butchering the language there.
High Fat.
High Fat. That's what people say to me, Andy. High Fat. But yeah, so Bond just jumps over, doesn't he? He don't care. He jumps over, and then we see one of Andy's memorable scenes, in terms of the naked swimmer in the pool as well. So I just love this. Bond is just so casual, and he's like in the enemy's grounds, but he's just so cool, and he's like, yeah, I'll just jump in the pool with this naked lady. So he's just obviously started to strip off, and then it cuts to him. He's wearing a fake third nipple, and then Bond, this made me laugh because Bond, he's got such an ego. So High Fat mentions, he doesn't know this James Bond is, because Bond is obviously pretending to be Scaramanga, and he's saying, Bond's kind of like hanging around and could be compromising, various missions that were, the enterprise that they're running. And then High Fat's just like, he doesn't really know Bond, and he just seems taken back a bit, and his ego's a little bit bruised. So I thought that was a bit funny. And then another thing is when Bond leaves, he then just casually throws like the third nipple away. So he's just going to get in a car, and he just like whips it off and just slings it off. And he's like, why would you do that? You might need that later on. I know High Fat has seen him with the nipple, so he doesn't have to prove again that he's got it. But there might be situations later on, when he goes back to the evening, they might go, oh, come here, Andy, look, this bloke's got a third nipple. And then, you go to get the third nipple out, but you haven't because you've thrown it away. So that just seemed a little bit weird there. And then Bond obviously arrives back later on in the day, so it's nighttime. And I remembered this. So we've got the fake sumo wrestlers who are pretending to be statues, and then Knick Knack as well is disguised as a statue. And I remembered that. So it's one of those, I know we've mentioned it before, where you start watching a film and then certain things come back to you about various scenes that are coming. And when I was watching that, I thought, oh yeah, this is the one where Knick Knack pretends to be a statue, and then you got those two sumo wrestlers pretending to be statues as well.
Yeah, this is the part of the film where I started to get a bit frustrated, because they want Bond dead, seemingly. Just kill him. but instead we have these fake sumo wrestlers. We have Nick Nack as a statue, and then a fight unfolds. And this is after he was at the place earlier, and he's invited back for dinner. So they knock him out. They don't kill him at this point, and he wakes up. He's at some sort of martial arts school, and this is the scene I referred to earlier. He's being not bathed, but he's got some women attending to him, seem to mopping his brow, and then he sees where he is in terms of his surroundings, and there's a whole bunch of martial arts students there, and they see some demonstration of fighting, including a sword fight where one of the students kills the other. And there's Bond almost challenged to a fight, and he comes in, and as the opponent bows at the start of the fight, as is customary, he just boots him in the head. And it's just, for me, that was a real laugh out loud moment, because it's just it was a dirty tactic, but it was also quite comic the way he just completely ignored the traditions of martial arts and just booted the guy in the head as he's bowing. So I found that quite amusing. One thing that we both noticed actually on this is that the stunt doubles are either less obvious, or it's actually that Roger Moore is in the fight scenes more compared to Connery. I suspect it's the latter, and that Moore is in more of the fight scenes, but it's obvious that it's not stunt doubles being used, so he is actually taking part. So that's quite a nice change of pace from some of the obvious stunt doubles we saw in the Connery series of Bond films. And Bond needs to escape there. So this point, really, I just didn't understand it at all. So he's in this kind of arena, as it were, where they're fighting, and there's wooden structures, and there's what looks like a window of sorts, but it's like almost like a trellis, I guess you would say. It's made out of wood, but there's holes in. He just dives through it, and it gave me lots of questions that I wrote down. So how did he know that it would break so that he could get through it? How did he know what was on the other side? Because he's got no idea where he is. And on why would you think that is the best way to escape, is to dive through an unknown substance of window to somewhere where you don't know what's on the other side, rather than like trying to run somewhere, for example? I put down this is something like you'd see in either Jackass or Takeshi's Castle. Just very out of place for me. But he does escape. Very, very strange. But he escapes anyway, and the students start filing out. The car arrives, and the two nieces, the schoolgirls from earlier, arrive on the scene, and they can handle themselves. They start tearing people apart left, right, and centre. And again, at this point, the fight scene was really good, I thought, with them kicking all kinds of ass. But there was another laugh out loud moment, and that's where one of the girls grabs a melon and just smashes it over a goon's head. Just so out of place from the rest of the fighting, but it made me laugh that, here's a melon, take one to the head. Just funny to me.
During the 70s, Andy, there were quite a few Kung Fu films, wasn't there? Or Kung Fu was becoming more mainstream. So I wonder if this was jumping on a bandwagon, maybe. But they're really, in terms of what was hot at the moment, that is the feeling. But it was a definitely a good fight scene. My comment, Andy, was, why did Lieutenant Hip arrive with his nieces, but then leave without Bond? He's like, oh, let's quickly get in the car. And then they get in the car and they start driving off. And like Moore, 007, like runs to the car, but they pull away. And he's like, why? You've come to find him. And then like, just leave him there. It just like,
I think if I remember correctly, Bond even opens the door
sure.
for the girls, doesn't he? They get in, and I think he's seeming like he's going to run around the other side to get in the car, and they just drive off without him.
Yeah. So, but
thanks for nothing.
Yeah, that just made me laugh. But then that just gives you the opportunity for a boat chase, Andy. So we had a boat chase in the last film, and if I think I recall, the boat chase in Live and Let Die was your favourite one of that film. The favourite scene. This time
it was indeed.
Yeah, this time we don't have any interruptions of weddings that we notice. No going over islands, but from what I recall, he does go through a boat and splits it in half, doesn't he, during this boat chase?
He does, yeah.
And also what I noticed was Bond's boat kind of cuts out, and he's having trouble starting it. And then, the kid swims up and jumps, climbs over into his boat. And then the kid says something like, oh, I get it going for like 20,000 or whatever the currency is. And then gets it starting. And then Bond just knocks the boy out of the boat, which I think is a bit harsh. And he obviously could afford the 20,000, whatever it was. So I thought that was a bit harsh on Bond there.
Yeah. It's a bit naughty. The kid's just trying to sell him his little toy elephant, isn't he? Just trying to make an honest buck, and then, helps him with the boat, and Bond just kicks him out of the boat. So a bit naughty. I did like when the kid's in the water and he just shouts, "Bloody tourists." That was another laugh out loud moment for me. That was a good bit of comic relief.
Yeah, and talking about comic relief, we're introduced to J.W. Pepper. And he's here with his lovely wife. And you see the sheriff is being rude to the elephant. And then the elephant just knocks JW into the water, which I thought was funny. And like you mentioned about comic relief with the kid. And then we get JW Pepper in here for a bit more comic relief.
Yeah, I thought this was a very odd placement for JW to come back. And I've not really done the research, but I'd be interested to know why they brought him back at all. Because he's not really needed in the film, but like you said, he's there for that comic relief. So obviously it made some sort of impression from his previous appearance. The question or the point that I made, and I don't know if this is fair of me or not, but I think J.W. Pepper is a racist. He's a redneck. He's a hillbilly. He's any of, if not all of the above. There's absolutely no way that a guy like him goes to Hong Kong. He's just the stereotypical, never leaving the state of Louisiana. I don't travel because, local things only. There's no way he goes on holiday to Hong Kong. So the fact that he's there is completely unrealistic to me.
And, when I was reading your notes, Andy, for the podcast, when you wrote that, I thought, you hit the nail on the head there. It's not something I picked up, but yeah, exactly for those points you just mentioned. Why is he in Hong Kong? It just doesn't make sense, does it? He must have got I don't know whether the actor is famous in America, or was he famous at that time and they kind of just shoehorned him into this film because he was well received in Live and Let Die, or he was popular for something else. I don't know. It just didn't fit.
Completely out of place. Later on, we see Scaramanga and Hi-Fat talking. Scaramanga's at a desk. He's kind of sitting there, and we see him slowly assembling the golden gun. He seems to have all the component pieces in his pocket, and he's just chatting away, and he starts slowly putting it together. I thought that was quite a nice touch. And later on, we're back with Bond and Goodnight. They're having dinner. Bond's playing it pretty smooth, trying it on as he does, but he gets knocked back. She's not interested. And I think your wife made a comment at this point as she was watching it with you. Did she say something along the lines of "good for you, girl"?
She did.
Does that sound right?
Yes, well picked up. Obviously, my wife has mentioned a few times about her being sexist, chauvinistic, blah blah blah. But yes, she was going, "Yeah, you go, girl. Well done, Goodnight. Well done."
And well, yeah, rightly so as well. She's spurned his advances. She's independent. She doesn't need Bond. Moments later, Goodnight is in Bond's hotel room and she's ready for action.
And the wife was then.
There we go.
My wife was going like, "What was all that about?" And then she was like, she was just a bit resigned. "What are you doing, Mary Goodnight?" She was so disappointed. Yeah, so I thought this was I don't know who would say, it made me smirk this bit, because we've got Bond is on the bed with Mary Goodnight, and then Andrea Anders arrives. So Goodnight is then hiding under the cover. But Bond, he's just so slick, isn't he? So he's just there kind of like, I think he's even leaning on one point on her, or is he just kind of like propped himself next to her on the bed? But he's just chilled out on the bed, just, putting some moves out on Andrea as well. And then he's just it's just obviously, for a normal person, that would be really awkward. But for Bond, he's just taking it in his stride, isn't he? And then Andrea leaves, doesn't she? I think she goes to the bathroom, and then Bond is kind of like ferrying Goodnight to the wardrobe. And then, and a couple of hours later, Bond gets goodnight. So Andrea leaves, and Bond gets goodnight out of the wardrobe, and then he makes a brilliant comment to say, "Your turn will come." And I just laughed there. And then my wife was like, "Really, really?" Like that. Just like that comment. He's like, "Really? Oh, the honor of your turn will come." It made me laugh. That did, but my wife is obviously a bit more grown up than me. So
that was amusing. It was also how quickly she went from being mad at him to being all gooey eyed again. I'll read the note that I put in word for word. Goodnight is very forgiving of Bond for this utter because that is a low move by Bond. He's stuffed her in a wardrobe so he can someone else. She's been in there for 2 hours. She's not happy at this point, and then he's basically said, "Oh, don't worry, I'll you one of these days," and she's like, "Oh yeah, that sounds great." Very, very bizarre.
a step back for Bond, isn't it, in terms of trying to be a bit of a more of a modern man. But then we are introduced again to JW. So JW is in like a car showroom, and he's sat in a car, and then he's kind of like looking in the cars, and he checking out the mod cons and stuff like that. And then Bond gets in, and then he said something like, "Oh, test drive," or something like that. And then they start chasing Scaramanga and Knick-Knack. And then it's just funny because JW kind of does, he turns and does that like double take, doesn't he? And recognises Bond from Live and Let Die. So I thought that was quite funny. But the comment I made, and my wife also said this as well, was considering Bond is a trained agent, he's got a license to kill. He's not very good at following people, is he, in cars? He wasn't very discreet. You've got the bit where the shots of Scaramanga and Knick-Knack are just like casually driving along. And then you got the scenes where Bond is like weaving in and out of traffic, and then like, hooters and everything like that are going off. So yeah, he's not the most discreet person in terms of tailing someone.
He doesn't approach quietly, that's for sure.
He doesn't. But we don't get that impressive car chase, so this is my favorite scene in the film I mentioned earlier. So we get the car chase, we get the bridge jump as well. This made me chuckle as well, because then Bond does, he mimics, doesn't he, an American accent as well, just before the car flip, jump, whatever you want to corkscrew jump. So I thought that was quite funny.
Yeah, he does. JW says something along the lines of, "You're not going to make this jump, are you?" And Bond says, "I sure am, boy." A pretty good American accent, not as good as the one I've just done there, but he tried. Visually, I thought this was really cool. The way that the bridge is angled, so it does the jump over the river, but also does a 360 flip and lands on its wheels. Very, very cool. But there's a really comedic sound effect that they play over it that just ruined the whole thing for me. I think without that sound effect, you've got a perfect stunt scene, but this just takes it back down to, this is just comedy filler.
Yeah.
So very, very disappointed at that. But I kind of almost sighed with disappointment when that happened.
Yeah, it is a bit out of place. It's like a whoop kind of sound. But yeah, you would have to mute it. Obviously, listen to the fake American accent by Bond, quickly mute it, and then unmute it, and I think going forward.
Yeah. Or make your own sound effects over the top, if that sort of thing interests you. Another thing I noticed about this particular section with the jump scene, Bond and JW, neither of them have their seatbelts on. And obviously they do a 360, so the car's upside down momentarily. And JW goes flying into the back seat, which you'd expect because he's not wearing his seatbelt and the car's just flipped upside down whilst he's in it. However, Bond stays perfectly in the position for driving the car. He stays in the driver's seat. He's still got hands on the steering wheel. He's still ready to drive, even though he is also not wearing a seatbelt. So that made no sense to me in terms of continuity.
Yeah, that's a good pickup, Andy. I didn't notice that. I think I was still reveling in the brilliant car screw jump. I think, I didn't pick that up at all. Do you think so? Obviously, at the end of the car chase, they've got police chasing them as well, and then Scaramanga drives his car into a barn, And then he's obviously doing something, and then Bond and JW outside, just like they're just about to get arrested, aren't they? And then you see Scaramanga as a flying car. Do you reckon Bond is a bit envious because he's here basically with no gadgets from Q, is he?
I think he'd be on the blower to Q saying, come on, you got to up your game here.
He's got nothing.
Like, where's my flying car? He didn't even have his little Meccano set from the previous film.
Was it Flying Nelly? Was it that one? Do you mean Nelly?
Yeah, the Flying Nelly. Yeah.
And was that He Only Lived Twice when he was in Nelly? But yeah, he was he was left wanting in this film because I've not counted the third nipple as a gadget, Andy. But yeah, I did when I saw that, I just thought, Bond was like looking up, and I just wondering what was going through his head, because obviously, in an earlier film, he had the rocket pack, little Nelly. He's got nothing. Roger Moore must be thinking like, oh, Connery got this, Lazenby got that, and I'm here with like a fake nipple, and that thrown away earlier. So yeah, he's shortchanged there. Yeah, so now we transition to Scaramanga's Island. So we've had the continuity error that I mentioned earlier about the plane and the float as well, and this is very friendly and welcoming. Scaramanga is. He's basically, it's like Bond has gone somewhere and Scaramanga is trying to make sure his TripAdvisor score is high. So he's showing all around his base, look at this, look at that. There's only me and Nick Nack, and then he comes across I can't remember the other bloke who basically maintains everything and runs all the energy room. But he's showing off everything, isn't he? As well, he seems great pride and joy. And then he shows him the ray gun, is what I'm calling it. I'm sure there's a better name for it. I can't recall what it's actually called, but I've named it the ray gun. And he uses it to destroy Bond's plane. And my thought there that just came into my head was Bond dreading being stuck on Scaramanga's Island, knowing that basically Scaramanga's probably got a wardrobe full of tracksuits, and Roger Moore is going to have to leave his business suits and his attire. He's left back at home. He's not, loving that idea.
Yeah, it's this whole scene bugged me. You touched on it earlier, the politeness. They are arch enemies, but he's just showing him around nicely. I think at one point, do they even like sit down for dinner? Is this the same scene where they sit down for dinner as well?
Yeah.
It just drags on. And again, it's another villain with his own island. It's another villain who's polite to his enemy, and it's just kind of wound me up a little bit. And the ray gun was an interesting scene, and Bond seems to know everything about how it works. He kind of shows himself as something of a science expert. So we know from previous films he's a wine expert, he's a liquor expert, he's
Oriental languages,
aside from
today
the one earlier. But yeah, he's a master of many fields, it seems.
Yeah, right, Andy. He is spot on. Yeah, he knows everything. He does. I think he's the type of agent that thoroughly reads the dossier of his missions. He does all the background knowledge, all the fact checking. So he's very comprehensive in terms of his analysis. So yeah. So we're near the end, aren't we, Andy? Now, so and then
we're getting close.
So the note I made was Bond is being hunted in the kill arena, and he pretends to be the James Bond dummy, which is something I remembered. I mentioned it earlier, didn't I? I remembered how this finished. So I think I like that. I did.
I liked it, yeah. It was a nice touch, and I did remember it before I rewatched the film. But the thing that annoyed me, and again, at this point, I think I was just fed up with the film, so lots of things started to annoy me as the film wore on. But how did he find the time to take the mannequin's clothes off, change into those clothes, replace the mannequin with himself, and also find the gun, which he dropped earlier, into... he was climbing on kind of the scaffolding of the set and his gun went into darkness. He managed to do all that, but he wasn't seen by Nick Nack. And Nick Nack was in the kind of control room watching all kinds of cameras and CCTV that he got in the room. How did he manage to do all that without being seen? Like, just completely unrealistic to me.
Yeah, and to be honest, I didn't pick that up, so I don't know if I just basically waiting for the film to end. But when I read that, I was then thinking, logistically, he dropped the gun earlier when he was climbing on the scaffolding. I get your point completely about the camera room, because obviously when we see Scaramanga hunting Rodney, we see Nick Nack in the camera room watching, like he's got pretty much all corners covered, hasn't he, in terms of the kill room. And then when you said about replacing the dummy, they're not light, are they? So can you imagine Bond like basically trying to be quiet, avoid cameras, then try to maneuver that as well? Yeah, it doesn't stack up. So yeah, that's a good observation there, Andy. So that is, he kills Scaramanga. And we now see Bond and Goodnight on a boat. So they're enjoying another successful mission. And Goodnight is finally getting lucky. So she's happy. She's being rescued by Bond. I think she probably thought she's going to stay on Scaramanga's island in a little bikini for the rest of her life. So she's happy. But Nick Nack appears. He's still alive. But he tries to ruin the occasion. But the thing I noticed, Andy, and you might have a different view on this, I thought it was a bit weird that he was holding a knife with the blade in his mouth. I just thought that was weird. I was trying to think why, basically. Why was my thing, about that? And then I'm thinking there must be instances in films where people have held knives in their mouths, but it just felt a bit weird, that bit did.
Yeah, go ahead. I was going to say, not only was he holding the knife in his mouth by the blade, he was holding it kind of sideways on, not across, like so the blade was between his teeth almost flat. It was on its side. So that just adds another level of danger that's not needed.
Yeah, interesting. Maybe that's why he's only a henchman and not the main villain, Andy. He never graduated. But yeah, this is another thing that me and the missus picked up was obviously Nick Nack is just throwing loads of bottle of wine, champagne, loads of glass everywhere. And then when Bond basically puts Nick Nack in the suitcase, he just casually walks back in, and then Bond and Goodnight just get down to business. There were no health and safety assessment or anything there, were there, in terms of checking out where all the broken glass was?
No, there was a lot of broken glass with a number of bottles that were thrown. And Goodnight is in the room while Bond is doing whatever he's doing, taking care of Nick Nack, and she's more concerned with cleaning up rather than Bond's safety. So I don't know whether that suggests that she doesn't really care about Bond at all, or actually she was just so desperate to get him in bed that she needed the bed to be cleared right there and then. And then the final scene. Oh, it's the same scene, but M calls the phone, and he asks to speak to Goodnight, and Bond is kind of says something like she'll be there in a minute, and then you hear muffled noise in the background of M still talking, and then Bond picks the phone up and says, "She's just coming, sir." And then they get down to it, which I thought was a bit of a naughty line to finish with, but typical of Bond to come up with some sort of innuendo to finish.
Yeah, and that just prompted me to think, Andy, how did M have, because that's Scaramanga's boat, isn't it?
It is.
So how did M have the telephone number? Are we assuming Bond had made a call off camera to M and said, "Oh, I've done my business. I'm just taking the boat back now"?
I wonder if there's some kind of like Hong Kong Yellow Pages and listed as boat, Scaramangas with the number in there for all to see.
Yes, but then they don't know anything about him really, do they, Scaramanga? They would just phone the Yellow Pages up to get the information, then they would know what he looks like.
This is true. For any younger listeners out there, the Yellow Pages is like the internet, but printed off into a big book. It's a paper version of Google, you might say.
We still get telephone book posted. We do. Not Yellow Pages, but just like, I don't know what it is, but only probably once a year we get it through the post still. Just go straight in the bin, recycle bin, obviously.
Yeah, save the planet.
Oh, Andy, do you reckon he's got the telephone number because they talk about their moth and butterfly collections?
Could be kind of like a secret society of whatever the word for moth and butterfly collectors is. I want to say philatelist, but I think I've just made that up. I'm going to Google it. One moment, please, listeners. This podcast is brought to you by Google and Bing and other search engines are
Ask Jeeves.
available. Ask Jeeves. Is that still a thing?
I don't know.
Who knows? Butterfly collector. A lepidopterist. There we go. Maybe they're in a secret lepidopterist club together.
Maybe I just love it how you just have that knowledge, Andy, in your head. You just recall it. It's brilliant.
Just seem to have it to hand right there.
Yes.
And that is the end of the film. Like we said, a pretty disappointing film, a bit of a slog to get through, but we're at the end now. There were some good things throughout. There's a few one-liners and quotes that are worth revisiting. So there's a bit with Bond and Saida, the belly dancer from earlier in the film. Bond says, "Did you see who shot Fairbanks?" Saida said, "No, I was in his arms. My eyes were closed." And to which Bond replies, "Well, at least he died happy."
Yeah, and the next one that I've got is between Bond and M, and I kind of mentioned this earlier, but this is the actual quote. But then Andy, I've got a question after the quote. So James Bond goes, "I mean, sir, who would pay $1 million to have me killed?" And then M, as sassy as ever, goes, "Jealous husbands, outraged chefs, humiliated tailors, the list is endless." Now, my question is, what chefs has he outraged? I must have missed. Have I missed something from the 9 films that we've watched so far? I can't recall him outraging any chefs and tailors. You know, he's very. Tailors must love him.
Oh, yeah.
M must not. Like if he's getting his suits through work and he's, M's just spending a load of his budget from MI6 on Bond's tailors. But I get the jealous husbands bit completely. But the outraged chefs and humiliated tailors, I don't quite, unless Bond is one of those people that goes and gets his suit fitted and he's just constantly making alterations to the suit. But M has some insider knowledge there that I don't think we've witnessed on screen.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. Maybe he only goes to female tailors and he's constantly wanting his inside leg measured or something along those lines. Something inappropriate. But the chef's thing, no idea. Unless he's, on whatever the food equivalent of TripAdvisor is, giving them 2-star ratings. I don't get that one at all. One more quote to call out. So when Bond is with Lazar, Lazar says to him, "Mr. Bond, bullets do not kill. It is the finger that pulls the trigger." To which Bond kind of points the aforementioned 3-fingered trigger gun. He says, "Exactly. I'm now aiming precisely at your groin. So speak or forever hold your peace."
I know some of the previous episodes we've picked out more quotes, but I think they're the 3 that kind of stick out for us. So we're moving on to another feature that we like to do, Andy. And at one stage, we're going to have to drop this, aren't we? Because the films are going to stop being based on books. But at the moment, we've still got some books to go at. So this section is about what differences are between the book and the movie. So this isn't comprehensive. There are other changes, but we've picked out 4 this week. So in the novel, the story is mostly set in Jamaica. But as you know, in the films, they've featured Jamaica, Caribbean islands already a few times. So they actually changed the location in the movie to the Far East, which kind of fits. And I think, Annie, I don't know if you know this, I think Ian Fleming either was based out in the Caribbean or he potentially moved there. So I think that's maybe why the novels tend to be set over there. I don't know. I'm just making that up or not.
I want to say, and again, this is something that I may have misheard, but I'm sure it's something my dad told me recently, that the property Skyfall, no, not Skyfall, there's a property called Goldeneye in the Caribbean that was owned by Ian Fleming. If that's not true, we'll edit that out. But if it's true, I look very smart right now.
In the novel, Andy, I've not read this book, but Bond has been brainwashed by the Russians and is sent to kill M. So Bond, the Russians are probably fed up with all the sass as well that M's giving Bond. So yeah, that's an interesting thing. I don't think that would have really held up in the movie, if I'm honest.
I can't imagine Bond being brainwashed. That seems a very far-fetched idea. But I've not read the novel either, so I can't comment on how it plays out, but that does seem a little bit far-fetched. Another non-feature of the book, there's no knick-knack in the book. There's also no J.W. Pepper and there's no Andrea Anders. So, 3 pretty pivotal roles in the movie. I have no place in the book of the same name, which was quite interesting. A final point is, in the book, Bond is nearly knighted following the mission, but he turns the honour down. I'm not sure whether Bond would turn that down necessarily in the movie universe. He seemed, I seem to remember a scene in an earlier Bond film where he is looking up at a picture of the Queen that he's got in his office.
I think from my research, Andy, and people let me know if I got this wrong, in the book, it ends with him and Goodnight spending some time together. They go to some kind of retreat to recuperate or something like that. And I think he turns it down to basically spend, say, a month or something with Goodnight.
A retreat to recuperate. Yeah, I know what that means. So that's some comparisons between book and movie. Jay, do you want to hear a joke?
Yes, I always want to hear a joke, Andy.
What did the lawyer say to James Bond?
I don't know.
I'd tell you, but then I'd have to bill you.
I like it, Andy. I like it. You've got some good jokes about James Bond. I like him.
Whoever I get them from seems to just have a plethora stored away somewhere, but they just keep coming to me every week.
Wow, Andy, this leads on nicely to the quiz where I'm posing you 4 statements, and these do not come easily to me. I'm struggling with these ones now. So let me just bring it up on my screen. So, as always, Andy, apart from the first episode, there are 2 statements that are correct and 2 that are false. So, are you ready?
I am ready. Let's do this.
So, the first statement, in the original script, when Moneypenny finds out that Bond has a contract out on him, fearing that this could be the last time Moneypenny sees Bond alive, the 2 of them share a brief kiss. That was in the original script and obviously didn't make it to the final script. My next one, Felix Leiter appears in a novel, but is obviously absent in the movie. The third statement. Are you ready? I can see you making notes.
I'm making notes. I'm going through my brain exercises to figure it out.
I hope you're not Googling it on the fly.
Absolutely not. This quiz has the utmost integrity.
Okay. Next statement. In the dinner scene with Scaramanga, Bond says, "There is a word with 4 letters and you are full of it." This sentence was again used in another Bond movie 13 years later. For people out there, Andy, I can see he's thinking on the camera there. So, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
For the next one. The last scenes filmed was at the karate school. Originally, Bond was supposed to have multiple fights, but got injured during one scene. This meant they rewrote the scene where Bond kicks his opponent when bowing.
Okay.
Would you like me to repeat any of those? And listeners, feel free to play along at home. There's 2 statements are correct and 2 are wrong.
Okay, this is an interesting one. I straight away have no idea. Like, there's none that really stand out to me. So this is going to be a tough ask, I think.
These are harder to think of every week. Now I've retired my granddad.
You've retired your... Is this like code word for, you've sent him a golden bullet or something? This is scandalous news that we're hearing for the first time. I'm going to dismiss the first statement around the kiss between Bond and Moneypenny. Okay. I don't feel like that would have been the right thing to do at this stage of the game. I think it's one of those relationships that never actually takes it to that level. So I'm going to say statement 1 is false.
Okay.
I'm going to say that statement 2 regarding Felix Leiter is true. Having not read the novel, I don't know that, but I'm going to say he's in the novel and he's not in the movie, so I'm going to say that's true. And I'm going to say that statement 3 is false as well, because I don't think they would repeat the same line twice in such an obvious way, which therefore means that statement 4 around the karate school scenes, I'm going to say is true. So I'm going to say it's false, true, false, true.
Okay. So you have got 2 right and 2 wrong. Now, would you like me to tell you, or would you like to hazard a guess?
I think I've probably got the last 2 the wrong way round.
That's correct, yes. He does reuse this line, and I can't remember which one it was, but it's a Timothy Dalton film. He says the same sentence.
I'm assuming, you said 13 years later, so I'm going to assume that's going to be The Living Daylights, because that would have been 87.
I think it was, yeah, from memory. Yeah. Look at that knowledge that he just rolls off, listeners. He's like a Bond encyclopedia. Yeah, you did well there. I obviously made up the first one because, yeah, interesting. You know, in terms of doing research about various things in Bond and reading lots of Bond articles lately. And you said about Bond and Moneypenny never getting together, which I don't think they do. But there is I'm trying to think, a cohort of watchers of Bond that believe Moneypenny and Daniel Craig's Bond have a intimate scene together that the camera kind of blacks out, but that is left ambiguous. There is a school of thought. So I don't think they ever get together, but there is, when you read various articles or forums, there is some people out there that think Daniel Craig and Miss Moneypenny get together.
I can't think of the scene.
I think Bond's injured or something, and she's nursing him, and then they get a bit friendly, and then the camera kind of blacks out or something.
I'll look out for that.
We can talk about it when we get to that episode, can't we? But yeah, well done, Andy. Felix Leiter appears in a novel, and then, as we just said, Bond repeats this sentence. Well done, Andy.
50%. It's okay. It's not a bad score. 5 out of 10, you might say, on a par with the rating of this film. So
yeah,
it's fitting that was my score.
So, Andy, that brings us on to kind of our last feature, and is a feature that I do enjoy, the ranking. So this is, you know, we're given some facts. You know, we've been tracking certain things. We've talked about the movie continuity errors. We've had the quiz. We've had one-liners, quotes. We've had Andy's joke. We've had it all, and now we get into the rankings, which is, you know, it is one of my favourites, Andy. And I do find some of them are getting a bit difficult to rank, if I'm honest, try to distinguish between not necessarily films, but certain people. So if I just kick it off. So at the beginning of the episode, Andy obviously told us what the runtime was, and that is actually the 3rd longest film we've had so far out of the 9 films. So it's only behind On Her Majesty's Secret Service and Thunderball. So, you know, respectable 3rd place. Kill count, I mentioned this one earlier, 1. So that is the fewest kills of any Bond film so far. So we have to see. I can't see how that could be any lower, Andy. I can't imagine a Bond film having no kills, if I'm honest. So is that a safe bet that's going to come bottom? We wonder.
I think it's got to be, hasn't it?
Yes, I don't think he's going to be a pacifist in any movies, or he basically just wounds and injures everyone and doesn't get a kill. But yes, I think that could be bottom of the table later on, as it is now. It's in 9th out of 9th. And, you know, we have started to introduce, you know, the kill counts by actor as well. So obviously Moore has only got 2 movies under his belt, but we are working out the averages. So Sean Connery has got 6 movies, an average of 12 kills per movie, and that's 72 kills. George Lazenby obviously only had the 1 movie, and that was 5 kills, so on, you know, an average of 5. So, Andy, the 2 movies so far, Roger Moore's got 4.5. This film has really knocked him down in terms of the average. I wonder if that's going to go up, though, in future movies. And the last one before I pass over to Andy is the Martini watch. And Andy, you mentioned this one earlier, didn't you? There's no martini drinking in this movie.
No, that's 3 in a row by my count. Let's see if that continues in future films. So The introduction of James Bond, is something we're tracking as well. It does appear in this, so this makes it 6 out of 9 for the series so far. This takes the second longest time of any Bond film so far, so 50 minutes 37 seconds. The longest time was in the previous film, Live and Let Die. So Roger Moore so far is the one that takes the longest to introduce himself. He's occupying 1 and 2 in terms of longest times. Hat watch. There's no hats. There's no throwing of hats. And again, that's 3 in a row. Hats seem to be a thing of the past as things stand. And also, we mentioned this just a few moments ago. Felix Leiter, whilst does appear in the novel, he does not appear in the movie. So he was in Live and Let Die, played for the 5th time by the fifth different actor, but no appearance in The Man with the Golden Gun.
Yeah, I'm a bit disappointed that we get no hats, Andy, at the moment. So that's a bit disappointing. But to combat that disappointment, let's talk about Bond girls. So let me go first. We've obviously got the ones that Andy mentioned at the top of the show. I'm struggling, Andy, when I kind of alluded to it earlier with these, because I don't know. I don't think we specified, well, I know we didn't really specify the criteria that we're ranking people on, have we really? So I'm kind of ranking it on looks, but also screen time. So if they appear in it more, then they're more likely to be higher up in my rankings. But also, if you're a Bond girl and / a Bond villain, how effective you are as well. So there's a numerous kind of strands to kind of like the rankings there. And I think that's why the last few films I've scored Bond girls quite low. So if we kind of go through the 4 that we're in for The Man with the Golden Gun, it's right. I'm just playing for time because I'm trying to find them on my list of the 35 Bond girls that we got now.
Yeah, 35 is a big old list to trundle through.
Not bad for 9 movies, is it? 35. Yeah, so I'm going to start from the highest ranking one. So that's Andrea Anders. So she's slipped into number 14 in my list. So she's just below Fiona from Thunderball. Actually, she's sandwiched between 2 Bond girls from Thunderball, Fiona and Paula. So not a bad place to be, is it, there between those 2? Andy, do you want to let me know where your one is? So we kind of go one by one, I think, on this one.
Yeah, so of the 4, Andrea also was my top pick from this film. I've slotted her in slightly higher. I've put her in at number 9, so she's gone straight into the top 10. Just above Fiona from Thunderball and just below Honey Rider. Again, not the worst place to be. Again, in terms of how we're ranking them, I agree with you in terms of my criteria. I've not necessarily wrote it down, but it's a bit of a gut feel. It's what they do, how they do it, and how they look doing it, basically. And some of those factors may be more relevant than others, depending on how I feel. But I thought Andrea was a very strong Bond girl, so she goes into the top 10 for me.
Respectable place to be in a top 10. So Mary Goodnight is my next Bond girl. So she has dropped in at 19. So she, a few places lower than Andrea. But I think, it's a comment we made earlier, in terms of the podcast. She was a bit useless. I think the comment I mentioned earlier in terms of, what people tend to say, blonde buffoon, bit of a stereotypical blonde, really. And she, I think my wife said she was weak. Some of the Bond girls seem quite weak. So she has scored lower down, but she is above some of the other ones we've had based on, she does get a fair bit of screen time, doesn't she? She's pretty much always in a bikini as well. So that, obviously moves up a few places on my list as well. And she's very attractive. So 19th position. What about you?
Also at number 19 for me. And you're right in that looks alone have kind of helped her out here in terms of the ranking. She's very ineffective. She's got that kind of stereotypical blonde persona, as you mentioned. I think if you were to separate looks and effectiveness, you'd have two very different results for me. So it kind of evens out as she's middle range Bond girl, I would say.
Yeah, so carrying on, I'm going to go for the next two in the same kind of breath, Andy, because they've gone in at number 31 and 32. So Saida and Chumi, just because they were barely in it. Obviously, Chumi was the naked swimmer that Andy recalled earlier, and Saida was the belly dancer. So apart from the bit earlier on, with the belly dancing club with the gangsters, so yeah, so they're in my list, Andy. They're lower than, and this was, my thoughts on what Rosie Carver and Ruby Bartlett were like. I didn't really like them at all, but they've gone in lower than those two just because doing it less really as well. So they didn't grate me as much as Ruby and Rosie did, but I think their appearances were quite fleeting. So where were they in your list?
That is interesting. So you've gone 31 and 32 with Saida getting the nod. I've gone very different with these two. So I've got Chumi and is at 22, so only a few places below Mary Goodnight. And I think it's the being naked in the water and being so memorable that's helped her out here, if I'm honest. There's nothing else that she does in the film, but she's very attractive. She's naked in the water. That's a win for me. So a respectable 22 out of 35 so far. Saida, bottom of the list. Very, very bottom of the list for me. So she's 35 out of 35. I don't want to be unkind, but she's not the most attractive, and she's not effective in any way. She's purely there as a vessel to hold the bullet that Bond is looking for. I'm sorry, but just her entire scene was pretty much unneeded, unnecessary. Not a fan.
Yeah, like you said, she's pretty much a vehicle, isn't she? Just to kind of get that the bullet. But to be fair to her, you're saying that she's not as appealing as some of the other ladies on the list, but she manages to woo 2 00 agents, so she must be doing something right.
Yeah, I mean, the opinions are my own. What do I know, really? But not for me. If I'm a 00, you're not getting my golden gun. That's for sure. Let's move swiftly on. Theme songs. So The Man with the Golden Gun by Lulu was the theme song for this. Coming off of last week, I'll go first on this. Last week I put Live and Let Die straight in at number 1. I thought it was a very strong entry. This was the opposite. This was the weakest song so far for me. So I've got this in 9 out of 9. I don't really like this song. It seems, when you mentioned earlier that it was written last minute because they didn't want to go with Alice Cooper, it makes a lot of sense because I don't think the quality is there. It just doesn't feel like a Bond song to me. So I was disappointed.
Compared to how you ranked Live and Let Die. So this is similar to the films, isn't it, really, Andy? Because, you mentioned earlier that you ranked Live and Let Die highly. I think you said, was it 8 out of 10?
Yeah.
And last week you ranked Live and Let Die by McCartney and the Wings as your number 1 song. And then this week you've gone straight to the bottom with The Man with a Golden Gun by Lulu. So you've got 2 extremes opposites there, haven't you? In a space of 2 films, you've gone to polar opposites. So it's interesting because I personally don't really like the song, but I'll put it in at 8th just because From Russia with Love, I don't feel the love, no pun intended. I don't feel the love for that song, if I'm honest. So The Man with a Golden Gun, I was listening to it, as I wrote the podcast notes. And I was thinking, and then I think I mentioned it last, episode. I like to listen to the playlist that you pull together, and try to listen to it a few times and thinking like, oh, where did it drop? And yeah, it's near the bottom, so it's 8th. So yeah, it's disappointing, yeah.
And no surprise why it didn't chart for me, because it is not a good song.
Indeed. So moving over to the opening credits. So obviously at the top of the show, I mentioned, we've got, the Golden Gun, we've got the usual naked or scantily clad models, the water ripples, explosions. And I don't know what your view is, but I know it's kind of iconic, isn't it? The opening sequences for the Bond, but they're all kind of merging together now. So that's why I put it in at number 6. It ranks higher than Diamonds Are Forever because I don't like how they've got Blofeld's cat in the intro bit, just a random white pussy there. I just don't like it. And then From Russia We Love, Dr. No, because it was at the very beginning of the franchise, I think they were still trying to, I won't so much like finding the feet, but they hadn't kind of got it refined really at that point. So yeah, number 6 out of 9. What about you?
So I've mirrored the songs with the credits here. So last week I had the sequence for the opening credits at Live and Let Die at number 1 because I thought it was very influenced by the voodoo and the silhouettes, and it fit the film very nicely. This one I've got in at number 9 out of 9, and the word that comes to mind to describe it is lazy. I think it's almost a color by numbers type. You've got a checklist. These are the things you need for a Bond opening credit scene. You've got a gun. You've got scantily clad ladies. You've got some explosions. You've got some water. It's like tick, 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 tick. That'll do. And it just feels really labored, really lazy. It doesn't particularly fit the theme of the film. Doesn't particularly fit the theme of the music. I just felt it was very substandard. So I've put it in at the bottom for that reason.
Yeah, so just before we move on, Andy, my number 1, and we can check the listeners, you can check these out on the website. We've got updated week by week. But just to recap, Goldfinger was my number 1, and as you mentioned, Andy, Live and Let Die was your number 1 in terms of opening credits.
Indeed. Let's see how that changes over the coming weeks. Let's move on to villains now. So we're at 22 villains total now because we've included Blofeld multiple times depending on the portrayal in the particular film. 2 to add to the list to make it up to the 22, and we've got Scaramanga and we've got Knick Knack. Now I'll go first with this, and we have quite different opinions here. So I've got Scaramanga in at number 16 out of 22. And the reason I've got him there is I felt like he was completely ineffectual as a baddie, but also his reasons for being a baddie were very weak. He's an assassin, and that's basically it. And it just felt flat. And also another thing I'll add, and I'll get your view on this in a second. Christopher Lee, I think, is a tremendous actor. He's been in numerous high-profile roles, fantastically portrayed. I thought his portrayal of Scaramanga was pretty poor. I didn't think this was a role that suited him, and I didn't think it was a role that was played particularly well. So that's why I've got him so low down on my list of villains. Do you agree or disagree with that, Jay?
I agree and disagree. So I've put him in at number 12 out of 22 because I think we discussed this in a few episodes ago. Now we've transitioned from Spectre. We've had, the odd kind of megalomaniac. In the last episode, we had, you could call him a drug kingpin, maybe. And like you said, this one is just an assassin, a very good one, $1 million a kill, ex-KGB trained agent as well. But yeah, apart from that, he's obviously doing, he's trying to get the monopoly on the energy, isn't he? Technology as well. But yeah, he is. But I think I said, didn't I? I can't remember his last episode or the episode before about the era that we're going in now. Now we've moved out of the Spectre era with the Connery and Lazenby films. I think some of these are a bit hit and miss, where you've just got like a megalomaniac or just someone kind of like operating independently. So yeah, it's interesting. I put him, 12th, just above, a couple of the villains from Live and Let Die, and just below Dr. Kananga, Mr. Big, as well from Live and Let Die. So yeah, my rankings are kind of consistent. The two more films that we've had so far.
Interesting. I think this is the ranking where we start to veer away from each other's opinions more so than anywhere else. So the other villain in this film was Knick Knack. Now, I really like Knick Knack, has to be said. I found him quite entertaining, but also, as I mentioned towards the start of the episode, the dynamic between Knick Knack and Scaramanga I thought was very, very interesting. It wasn't the usual master and servant type role. Scaramanga is technically the boss, but Knick Knack seems to be able to make his own decisions and push his buttons a little bit and have a little bit of fun as well along the way and put Scaramanga into interesting and potentially dangerous situations. And I quite liked that dynamic. So I've ranked him at 8 out of 22, much higher than Scaramanga, even though Scaramanga is the lead villain. I just found the Knick Knack character far more interesting, far more entertaining. And so that's the reason I've got him in so highly. What about you, Jay? I think you've got a different opinion, haven't you?
Yeah, so when I was surprised with your ranking, Andy, if I'm honest. But I get it, in terms of the dynamics, and it's quite an interesting character. My kind of main criteria for the villains is like intimidation or in terms of their grand plan. So that's why I put Knick Knack as number 18, just because he's a manservant. So he is, looking after Scaramanga, washing his tracksuit and stuff like that. So I think, in terms of being effective, and obviously Bond manages to dispose of him in a non-violent way by putting him in a suitcase. So that's why I put him around, Osata and Helga, because Osata, we mentioned, wasn't very effective in You Only Live Twice. Helga was the Bond villain that had Bond tied up, then make love, then fly him in an airplane to jump out. So, Knick Knack did come above her, but I just didn't think he was intimidating. And I think Bond, could easily dispatch of Knick Knack. So that's where I've ranked him lower down. But like I said a few minutes ago, the villains in the last few films, even counting Diamonds Are Forever, I think a lot weaker than the villains that we've seen earlier on in the franchise.
I would agree with that.
So moving on to movies, we've obviously, discussed the score out of 10. So, we both said at the beginning of the show, 5 out of 10, but just to kind of let people know where that means in terms of the league table. So 5 out of 10 for me is joint with Diamonds Are Forever. But as we said before, we're not given tied position. So the decision I had to make, Andy, was Diamonds Are Forever, 5 out of 10. Man with a Golden Gun, 5 out of 10. Which one is the better film? And thinking about it, and obviously we're watching them each week, so the films are fresh in our minds. I've said Diamonds Are Forever is better. So Man with a Golden Gun, 5 out of 10, slips into 9th out of 9. What about you?
Completely agree with that assessment. I think I could have probably gone 3 or 4 out of 10 had it not been for a handful of scenes that really saved it for me. Like the karate school scene, like the car jump chase scene, and 1 or 2 others that were, quite memorable and quite entertaining. The rest was very much filler. So yeah, it was the same internal argument I had. Was it better or worse than Diamonds Are Forever? And for me, it was slightly worse. So I've also got it in at 9th out of 9 films so far. So then, just adding to that slightly, we've got movies by actor. Now for Roger Moore, I've only got 2 to judge so far. So I last week said Live and Let Die, 8 out of 10, and now I've gone Man with a Golden Gun, 5 out of 10. So it's a very clear order there. And Jay, your order will match mine, I'm sure, because of the ratings you gave it.
Live and Let Die was 6 out of 10, and Man with a Golden Gun 5 out of 10. So yeah, just the one difference in terms of position, because obviously we've only watched 2, and scoring. We're going to look at this a bit later on. Once we watch more films, I think we're going to see his table potentially change a bit more. Andy, the last bit in terms of the rankings is Bond actors. So I've said at the moment, based on the 9 films that we're seeing, Sean Connery's number 1, Roger Moore number 2, and George Lazenby number 3. For me, watching that Man with a Golden Gun film hasn't changed the order for me, and I don't think, if I'm being honest, it's going to change the order until we start watching different Bond actors.
I think you're right. We've said that this film was very much disappointing and we've got it ranked at the bottom, but I don't think that's necessarily down to Roger Moore's portrayal of Bond. So for the moment, I've still got him ranked as second behind Connery and above Lazenby. I think I am open to changing that, though, if his performance weakens in later films. So I'll be watching out for that if he plays things in a different way, or the quality of acting drops, or whatever that may be. So I'm open to changing that ranking, but as things stand, I've still got him in as a silver medalist behind Sean Connery, as the results stand.
Yeah, as you were saying that, I was thinking, maybe because you obviously mentioned about dropping down potentially, but I was thinking the next few films of Roger Moore, like Tenure, would have to be really good to kind of dislodge Sean Connery at number 1. So it might happen. From memory, I can't remember. I think we said this. I can't remember we said this off the pod or on the pod, Andy. My memory of the Roger Moore films were that it dipped in terms of quality. So I don't think that's going to happen in terms of the ordering. I am looking forward to watching the Roger Moore films, but I'm also looking forward to the next actor.
Indeed. So that brings us to the end of another episode of The Rating Room. I would normally end with some sort of quip or little one-liner that I'd pre-thought of in the past. But I can't this time. I'm just feeling a bit deflated from watching The Man with the Golden Gun. And the next one, Heavens Above Me, it's The Spy Who Loved Me. So join us next week for episode 10. That's the best I've got, Jay. I'm tired. This was a long film.
Well, that's this week's episode done. We hope you enjoyed it.
Special thanks to the band Sugar Tongue for the theme tune to The Rating Room. You can find them on all the usual social media channels. And be sure to check out their song The System, available now on Spotify.
You can find and message us on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram by searching The Rating Room.
You'll find all our social media links on our website, theratingroom.com, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Or feel free to drop us an email at theratingroom@gmail.com. Goodbye, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week, right here on The Rating Room.
The Rating Room. The Rating Room. The Rating Room. The Rating Room.
We let things pile up in the DVR, we add them to our queues, we wait for the DVDs and Blu-rays. We time shift. The Time Shifters podcast. Sci-fi, horror, fantasy, superheroes, comedy, action, film, television, maybe some not-so-current events. Find us on iTunes or at timeshifterspodcast.com.